On a frigid Washington day in early January of 1965, 92 newly minted congressmen took their places for the first time on the national stage. They had been swept into office in the landslide election of 1964 that gave Lyndon Baines Johnson his first term and the Democrats a supermajority in Congress.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
The Washington Post would later call this the most productive Congress in American history. Guided by President Johnson's vision of a great society, this Congress would enact legislation that continues to impact our lives half a century later.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the Congress, my fellow Americans, on this hill which was my home, I am stirred by old friendships.
The Freedom of Information Act, the Voting Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid. This Congress changed the course of American history.
Though total agreement between the executive and the Congress is impossible, total respect is important.
Among those 92 freshmen that evening was a 34-year-old, newly representing the 9th District of Indiana.
I am not unaware of the inner emotions of the new members of this body tonight. 28 years ago, I felt as you do now. You will soon learn that you are among men whose first love is their country.
Lee H. Hamilton began his career of public service that January. He would bring to that Congress and the nation a commitment to a life of civic engagement. Community life in the 1940s was evolving from farm living to town living. They had made it through the Great Depression. There was a war to win. Communities rallied and came together in new ways. Civic engagement was part of the ethos. Ordinary people engaged and making an extraordinary difference where they lived. They shared an evolving national culture, too. Big band music, radio comedies, elegant movie stars. People paid for that entertainment and shopped at the five and dime with what they earned with the newly created minimum wage of 40 cents an hour. Lee Hamilton came of age during that period in one of those small towns, Evansville, Indiana.
Well, Evansville is small enough as a town where you know the leadership and people. I always considered it an advantage to have that community interest.
The Second World War is one of the 4 great molding events of the history of the United States. People from places like Evansville, Indiana, might find themselves in the jungles of Burma, or in the deserts of North Africa, or marching in suburbs of Paris. So it's impossible to exaggerate the impact of the war on the country. The country then is stepping into a sense of itself, a sense of its potential, a sense of its responsibilities, unlike any that it had felt before. It's very exciting. Kind of at one level appeals to the national vanity, but at another level involves all sorts of both awe-inspiring and frightening duties and responsibilities.
As the son of a Methodist minister and a standout athlete, Lee had some special influences on his life, influences that shaped his sensibilities in later years. The first was growing up as a preacher's kid in the public eye.
Now, my father was a Methodist minister, and my mother was, as you'd expect, very involved in the church. They were marvelous parents in terms of mentoring me.
When you grow up in a preacher's home, I think you are part of a congregation that becomes your whole family. So he always had a bit of a public persona. His church, the church was his family. I'm sure that puts some pressure on him in certain ways, but you know, everything we know about Dad is he is exactly what you see.
In that minister's home, Lee experienced what it means to live a public life. So it was no major transition when, in high school, he began to attract attention for his athletic skills.
I couldn't walk down the street in Evansville without people talking to me about basketball.
It was the late 1940s. There were no professional sports with huge followings, no national networks covering college rivalries. As portrayed in the movie Hoosiers, small-town life revolved around the high school basketball season, and Lee was the star.
Lee Hamilton and Coach Walter Riggs, who has chosen to start the ball game, Gene Southwood and Walter Vanover at forwards, Lee Hamilton at center, and Joe Schwitz and Donnie McDowell at guard.
Coaches had a profound impact on my life. I grew up in Indiana, basketball.
Hamilton drives in, scores again, and is breaking the game wide open.
At a time that was very different from today. In those days, the NCAA had just begun in the 50s, so it wasn't very well organized. Pros didn't even have pro basketball, or if you had it, it was nothing like it is today, highly structured. Everybody focused on their local high school team. That was the world of athletics for them. And I was probably one of the best known student persons in the community. Everybody knew the local basketball team. That's the community I grew up in. And that had quite an impact on me, I'm sure, more so than I realized at the time.
Lee Hamilton of Evansville Central receives the Arthur L. Tressler Award for Mental Attitude. Paul Stangl presents the medal as Lee's coach, Walter Riggs, looks on. Lee's father is especially proud because this coveted award is based upon athletic ability plus academic and citizenship records during his high school career.
I don't think you can understate how much basketball shaped his character. The sense of fairness and sort of competition.
And leadership.
But also just that, you know, you've got to stay in the game. I'm always impressed with Dad that, you know, one of the fundamental skills he has is that he can take the emotion out of an issue and just stick with the facts. And I think that's hugely important in policy, but it's very much a part of his character. And I think it comes from in many ways from his time playing basketball.
Like a big fish in a small pond, Lee was learning about notoriety and community, and he was thriving. But in his heyday, he learned another lesson about living in the public eye, this time as he observed the example of his minister father, Dr. Frank Hamilton.
Now, to start with, it's very important to remember that in the United States, and especially in the Midwest, a very large portion of the country had been opposed to joining World War II. And Pearl Harbor just transformed all of that.
My father, in a sense, kind of took all that structure and he said that's not the way to go. He was a Christian minister, Martin Luther King type. The people I have known who have been actively engaged in improving their community are people who know the community. They know the problems of the community. They know the strengths of the community, and they know the people quite well. And almost all of them want to make their corner of the world a little better.
The 1950s ushered in a new era in American history. It was in that optimistic era that a family could buy a brand new house for just over $8,000 on a minimum wage of 75 cents an hour. Alaska and Hawaii became states. Charlie Brown and the Peanuts Gang made their first appearance in newspapers. And a yet-to-be-discovered Elvis Presley made his first public performance in a talent show at Hume High School in Memphis.
It was an exciting time in America. People were optimistic. They were looking forward to the years ahead. They saw that the United States had emerged from World War II as the leader of the West. They saw the rise of the Soviet Union, and the tensions began to build toward the Soviet Union and the United States. The Cold War was getting underway, so it was a very crucial period in many ways.
In 1949, the Soviet Union explodes an atomic bomb, years before what was expected. All of a sudden now, the rival power is a superpower too. Then China falls to the communists, 1949. This is the most populous country on earth, formally allied at this time with the Soviet Union. Another shock. Now it seems like the bulk of Eurasia is under communist rule, armed with the atomic bomb.
Lee stormed into the 1950s as a student at DePauw University, where again he was a big fish, but in another small pond. He threw himself into college life. Basketball standout, leader in student government, president of his fraternity, active in social and religious groups. He was so engaged in the DePauw community that in his final year, the college awarded him the Walker Cup, an honor given to the most outstanding member of the senior class. And in a lighthearted spirit, Lee's classmates poked fun at him by giving him the Gold Brick Award, doing the least and getting the most. It was a great 4 years. During these days, Lee had two life-changing experiences. The first was at DePauw. It was at college that he met the love of his life, Nancy Ann Nelson.
So senior year, he agreed, they went out, she thought they had a wonderful time, and every night until the end of the school year, they went out to the campus cafe. Mom had coffee, Dad had lemonade, and Mom said that she loved just listening to Dad talk, and she had hoped that by hanging around him that she would become more of an intellectual like he was, and then she goes, that didn't happen.
She came from the Chicago suburbs. At the time, the joke was that the DePauw was made up of wealthy women who came from the Chicago suburbs and poor men like me who had to come to DePauw because of the Rector Scholarship.
Nancy and Lee became lifelong partners. She brought to Lee a down-to-earth balance to the success and notoriety he would experience through their lives together. The second life-changing experience came after graduation.
One of the things I remember well about college is walking across the stage at graduation to get my diploma. And I didn't have the slightest idea what I wanted to do. And I kind of envied my peers because they all seemed to be very well directed at that time. I was not.
Little did Lee know as he walked across that stage, he'd soon find direction in the exciting developments taking place in Europe.
Well, it's a miracle. It's one of the defining points of European history. They were flat on their backs after World War II.
There was the sense of rebuilding. The Americans had made a formidable effort to help spark European renewal, with a path-breaking European recovery program called the Marshall Plan, 1947, and really got going 48 to 52. And Europe begins to take off.
What a joy it was to see them recover from that and to start on a new life, if you would, with new opportunities. They were embarrassed by Hitler. They were embarrassed that Germany followed Hitler, and they wanted to make amends. They wanted to become a member of the West.
In 1952, following graduation from DePauw and still pondering what he was going to do with his life, Lee decided to launch himself into the heart of the European Renaissance. He traveled to Germany to enroll in Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main.
Lee speaks often about his time as a young man traveling through Germany. And of course, it was a very meaningful experience for him, as it would be for any young person who is impressionable, who grew up and maybe didn't have an experience traveling overseas, which was the case for Lee.
Well, the German universities at that time, they didn't care whether the students came to class or not, and I didn't care. So I traveled all over Western Europe, basically. I focused on Germany, Spain, France, UK, Italy, and what we call Western Europe today. Tried to cover as broad of it as I could. Went to Spain, traveled around the Eastern Mediterranean. I had a wonderful time.
Of course, post-war Germany was in a process of recovery, and the experience of seeing firsthand what the consequences are of World War, I think gave Lee a very strong impulse to dedicate his life to finding diplomatic solutions.
In general, it's a very exciting time to be in Europe as an American interested in international affairs. And it would be the kind of experience that would make you think, as an American at this moment in history, I can actually help change the world in a positive way. If I take part in this, I can be part of changing the world's future.
That year of roaming had a deep impact on him. For the first time in his life, Lee had become a small fish in a very large pond. He would be fascinated by that large pond for the rest of his life. Something else happened in Europe that year, and that something else had an even bigger impact on him.
Towards the end of the time that Dad was in Germany, Mom went over to Europe on one of these big tours, and Dad went to London to meet Mom, and then basically followed along with the tour. I guess from after London, they ended up going over to Germany and going down the Rhine River and the Danube some, and Dad would sort of meet them from town to town, and so they had sort of their real courtship there at that time in Europe.
Lee returned to the United States as a changed person. He was committed to the love of his life, and he'd found a direction, but he still wasn't sure which career path to take. Instead of wallowing in indecision, he took action. He decided to enter law school at Indiana University.
I didn't have any intention of practicing law. I didn't even know any lawyers. I didn't know anything about the law practice. No one in my family had been engaged in the law at all. So it was a strange world to me.
But he wasn't going to law school alone. Lee and the love of his life, Nancy Ann Nelson, were married on Wednesday, August 25th, 1954, just before law school classes began. Lee and Nancy took on life. Together, they made it through completing Lee's law degree. Then, after a short sojourn in Chicago, They settled in Columbus, Indiana, where Lee took a post at a small law firm. 3 kids came along, and Lee entered the gateway to his life's work.
I went and joined the law firm, a small one, 3 or 4 partners. And one of the great advantages, as it turned out, I hadn't figured this out, the senior partner was an older man who traveled the circuit a lot, the law circuit, but he couldn't drive. I could drive. So I tagged along, and I got acquainted with all the lawyers. Everything has a legal aspect to it, and so you naturally get involved in every local issue. Maybe it's building a bridge, maybe it's enabling a group of people to form some kind of an organization to have an impact on the city or the county. You just are drawn into that in the practice of law. And that introduced me to politics in a very direct way, gradually. And I liked it. And I decided let's try it.
It was the 1960s. The Beatles took the United States by storm, and the twist became the dance rage among teenagers. Minimum wage bumped up to $1.10 an hour, as the price of a family home rose to just under $12,000. International tensions were rising, fueled mostly by fear that the United States and the Soviet Union would clash in a nuclear war. At home, the civil rights movement ignited when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and 51 black demonstrators were arrested in a lunch counter protest in Atlanta. John F. Kennedy, the first president born in the 20th century, was elected by a narrow margin over Richard Nixon. The new president and first lady brought a magical style to the White House, setting a positive tone as the nation dealt with major issues.
So what does Kennedy represent? What does he want the Democrats to represent? What he wants them to represent is youth, energy, that kind of image, exciting, quick. Kennedy talks about his administration as a new frontier. We're going to go into space. We're going to urge all Americans to volunteer to help in a new thing called the Peace Corps. Americans flocked to this.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And that kind of call would have strongly resonated for a young man like Lee Hamilton. What could he do for his country?
A small-town lawyer interested in politics had to start a political career somewhere, and in Lee's case, that was at the very bottom.
I had made up my mind what party I belonged to, or wanted to belong to. And I said, well, how am I going to help that party? Well, I began to what they at that time called poll the voters, knock on doors. Lincoln, well, that's the way he started, polling the precinct. And the election day came, and I had a list of people. I went around and got them to the polls. You couldn't start any lower than I started.
By the early 1960s, Lee had moved up the political ladder as a volunteer for John F. Kennedy's Indiana campaign.
I don't care what happens in Indiana by itself unless the rest of the country is going ahead. And therefore this state, which for 24 years has sustained the Republicans, I think you should give us a chance. I think you should give us a chance.
I met Kennedy several times, always in a small group. He was an up-and-coming young politician. He kind of drew me into the inner circle of the Democratic Party.
As Lee was becoming more well-known in Indiana Democrat circles, he had a fateful experience with his longtime friend, Birch Bayh.
I had been a friend of Birch Bayh. We were in the same fraternity.
I asked Birch about politics. He was heavily involved at that time, heavily involved. And he said, why don't you give it a shot?
We were friends while we were both in college and university. I think the most compelling thing that one has to observe about Lee Hamilton is he's absolutely honest. His word is his bond. I'd trust him with my life, with my family, and of course with my country. And I think he set such a magnificent example for others who might want to follow, and has shown that you can make a difference in this system.
I approached it from the standpoint of what I was interested in.
I was not interested in the state legislature. I wasn't interested in building highways. I had been interested in international affairs. You did that in Washington, not in Indianapolis. So I said, why not run for Congress?
In 1963, as Lee was preparing for his first campaign, the world was shaken.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson assumed the duties of the presidency following President Kennedy's death. And in the months that followed, he campaigned for a full term. Lee was on the Indiana ballot with LBJ and was in for a pleasant surprise.
Come on, you Hoosiers, look at our progress in just 150 years. We now are building a new Indiana, 'cause we're the modern pioneers.
I had the good fortune to run for the first time in 1964. It was a landslide year. Any fool on the Democratic ticket could win, and several did. And I ran. I had no idea it was a landslide. That's how dumb I was. I'd done all the campaigning, and it never occurred to me it was going to be a landslide year. But it turned out to be a big year. If you go back in Indiana history, 64 is a great Democratic year. I just lucked out. Pure, simple luck. Plays a big role in politics.
Lee then is part of this enormous wave that is swept in the 1964 election. The wave still full of trust in government, confidence in the United States, and confidence in the Democratic Party's leadership.
He was elected president of the 89th Congress Democrat Freshman Group that year. And the following year was named Outstanding Freshman Congressman by the Capitol Hill Young Democrat Club. He was honored for displaying the characteristics of an effective congressman. Familiarity with the legislation that comes to the House floor, ardent committee work, and responsiveness to constituents. These commitments remained his top priorities throughout his career. One of Lee's first-year innovations got a lot of attention from other freshmen. He figured out how to find money for his rural district.
He understood what the grants were for, and so he could find ways to advocate for those. I didn't represent a rural district, but I can absolutely imagine that he invented the art form that others before him hadn't thought of it.
I represented a rural area. I quickly recognized that a lot of federal money was flowing into Indianapolis, not so much into southern Indiana. It wasn't very hard to figure out why. Indianapolis had a staff They had highly skilled people to go after the money. They knew how to fill out the forms, they knew who to talk to. And so I began to have a lot of meetings with the local officials and tried to help them understand how they could get assistance, not just from the federal government, but federal and state, to help them with the problems they have.
Lee obviously had the respect of his colleagues, but what made his fledgling leadership so effective was that he asserted himself as a leader from day one.
Well, they gave me a jump start, and people understood very quickly, and I mean by people, the leadership of the Congress, that I was one of the key players to come from the younger group of newly elected members of Congress. And I worked on a nonpartisan basis. I worked with the Republican leadership, so we were in sync as much as possible. And all the time trying to facilitate the connections.
During that first year in Congress, Lee developed a special relationship with President Johnson. In that relationship, he demonstrated another quality of leadership, the courage of his convictions.
President Johnson, for reasons I don't fully understand, even today, took a special interest in me. As president, I asked him to come into the 9th District for a rally for the Democrats. To my utter surprise, he accepted. 20,000 people showed up.
That year, 1965, the president was making incessant demands on Congress to pass his grandiose agenda to build a great society.
I propose that we begin a program in education to ensure every American child the fullest development of his mind and skills. I propose that we begin a massive attack on crippling and killing diseases, that we launch a national effort to make the American city a better and a more stimulating place to live, increase the beauty of America, end the poisoning of our rivers, that we carry out a new program to develop regions of our country. We make new efforts to control.
Lee was new to Washington, new to Congress, friends with the president. But he'd learned from his pacifist father that sometimes you have to challenge even those people you most respect.
I propose that we eliminate every remaining obstacle.
Only 9 months into his first term, Lee sent a public letter to LBJ calling for a pause for reflection and a more deliberate pace of legislation.
And I made it very clear that I'd be glad to talk with them about it at any time. It wasn't personal. I just thought they were wrong. I told them, look, I'm not going to go behind your back. I'm not going to try to undercut you. If I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to tell you why I don't like it.
I mean, he was authentic. He was comfortable in his own shoes. He was well prepared. He had the relationship, and he used it for good.
The turbulent 1970s. The cost of a family home averaged only $17,000, but you paid double-digit interest on the mortgage. Minimum wage was up to $1.60 an hour. But during the OPEC oil crisis, those workers had to wait in gas lines for hours and work more than half a day to pay for the gas when they got to the pumps. TVs used rabbit ear antennas, and Saturday morning was the only time that kids could watch cartoons on those TVs. The Beatles broke up, PBS got started, and Michael Jackson hit the charts for the first time. The biggest disruption of the 1970s was the Vietnam War. The nation was growing more divided over the issue, sparking widespread protests at home. Some ended in tragedy. At Kent State University, 4 student demonstrators were killed by National Guard troops. In what was dubbed the Hard Hat Riots, construction workers in New York City attacked about 1,000 students who were protesting the Kent State shootings. The division was growing more bitter.
Well, the Vietnam War was the great disillusionment of America. It's very hard now to recall how rending it was. I mean, Americans now do have a lived memory of disappointments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Vietnam has some of those qualities, but at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude larger. Increasingly, by the early 70s, a sense that maybe our government has been lying to us about the possibilities, about what it's doing. Constant violence in American cities over civil rights issues. In general, it's hard to remember now. The 1970s was perhaps the most violent decade in American society in our history.
As the turbulent decade of the 70s began, Lee was a veteran congressman. He continued to focus on the 3 core activities for which he was honored as a freshman: familiarity with legislation, ardent committee work, and responsiveness to constituents.
But if I represented the people of Indiana, it doesn't do any good to spend the weekend in Virginia. I made the trip from Washington to Indiana 40 times a year for 34 years.
By this time, Lee was becoming very familiar with the complicated and confusing system of committees in Congress, because that's where the heavy lifting is done.
Well, Congress deals with a lot of issues, hundreds of issues. You can't do it all by yourself. You can't have 550 people working on the problem. You have to break it down, and you break it down by committees and by subject matter.
After a caucus of the committee, the full committee, Democrats and Republicans, in deciding how we would meet our responsibilities to the full Senate to be able to conduct and conclude this hearing.
So the committee idea is almost forced on you, in a sense, in order to deal with the problems.
But it wasn't just working in the committees that Lee embraced. He saw problems in the Congress he wanted to tackle.
There was an initial effort to restructure it in 1970, and then an all-out push by the Democratic caucus to knock down the utter dominance of key committees by long-serving white Southerners in the early 1970s. So, and the break point comes after the 1972 election. In 1973, the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives with Lee Hamilton decide we are going to have criteria other than seniority to determine who will be committee chairs. And to demonstrate that we mean business, the caucus voted to take away the chairmanships from 3 long-standing committee chairs in 1973.
I was not an admirer of the seniority system. I thought the institution of the Congress could be stronger if it did not have the seniority system. The seniority system was the way we developed the leadership, and I thought there were better ways to do it. You had to look at the person involved and see whether that person had the qualities of leadership you wanted, not how long they had been there.
Well, that kind of broke the back a little bit of the old dominance of the white conservative Southerners in the committee control of the House of Representatives and opened things up to the younger reformers.
The 1980s dawned with signs that the political and cultural storms of the 70s might be subsiding. It was the decade of the Reagan Revolution, the return of the U.S. hostages from Iran, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Music videos on freshly launched MTV made pop stars megastars. And the brand new black entertainment television gave black musicians a long overdue spotlight. Our minimum wage jumped up to $3.15 an hour, and our family home prices surged to an average of $47,500. But the big question on everyone's lips was, who shot JR? By the early 1980s, Lee had served with distinction for a decade and a half.
I yield to the distinguished dean of the Indiana delegation, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Hamilton. 5 minutes.
Mr. Hamilton's recognized for 5 minutes without objection.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise, of course, in opposition to the Michael resolution. This is a terribly important question that's before us.
During his first years of service, Lee had earned great respect in the Congress and in the nation. Soon he'd need all the credibility he possessed. He'd be called on to lead an investigation into a governmental mess. This one, the biggest challenge he'd faced yet, and one that put him on the national stage, the Iran-Contra affair.
How important is this scandal? You've been in Congress many years. And how would you rate it in respect to Watergate and other national scandals?
I don't try to make comparisons. I do think this is a very serious matter. What happened in brief was that the United States was saying to all the world that we were doing one thing, when in fact we were doing quite the opposite secretly.
The Iran-Contra affair can be reduced basically to this. Congress told the administration to quit supporting a group of questionable insurgents in Nicaragua called the Contras. This is a resistance movement fighting the communist government in Nicaragua. Some zealots in the Reagan White House decided they were going to try to circumvent those congressional restrictions.
A quiet phase now as we complete the rather painstaking investigation that's been going forward. And when the public hearings begin on May 5th, we'll see a resurgence of interest in the Iran-Gate story.
In order of importance, what are some of the other answers you'll be looking for?
Well, I think the money records and the president's knowledge, obviously, are the two critical questions that are involved.
Chris?
Mr. President, you have stated flatly, and you stated flatly again tonight, that you did not trade weapons for hostages. And yet, the record shows that every time an American hostage was released, last September, this July, and again just this very month, there had been a major shipment of arms just before that. Are we all to believe that was just a coincidence?
Chris, the only thing I know about major shipments of arms, as I've said, everything that we sold them could be put in one cargo plane and there would be plenty of room left over.
Sir, if I may, the polls show that a lot of American people just simply don't believe you. That the one thing that you've had going for you more than anything else in your presidency, your credibility, has been severely damaged. Can you repair it? What does it mean for the rest of your presidency?
We've got a lot of questions about process here. Why did the process break down? How was it that a colonel on the National Security Council staff was telling the Director of Central Intelligence what to do? How was it that that colonel was calling up the president of Costa Rica and saying to him, we're going to cut your aid off? The process really broke down, and we don't understand that as well as we'd like to, and we want to make suggestions as to how that process can be strengthened.
On May 5th, 1987, the world tuned in as the Congress began a televised investigation into the allegations of covert arms sales and rebel funding.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and honor to call upon my colleague from the House of Representatives, the chairman of the Select Committee, the Honorable Lee Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A Hoosier constituent of mine recently asked, why is the Congress spending so much time on the Iran-Contra affair when there are so many other important things to do? That question is appropriately addressed as we begin.
They were actually going to try to trade arms to Iran, get money from that process, and use that money from an interaction that they shouldn't have been having either, kind of to use that to support the Contras and circumvent the congressional ban.
The short answer is that we hold these hearings because in the course of the conduct of the nation's business, something went wrong, seriously wrong. If something goes wrong in our system, we want to bring it out into the open, examine it, learn from it, and if possible, correct it.
Over the next 3 months, the committee heard hundreds of hours of testimony, sometimes involving heated exchanges.
They had attempted to...
But don't you understand, Mr. Chairman, there's an inference here. There's an inference that somehow this memo... Let me finish.
Of counsel repeatedly, in effect, coaching the Admiral on his responses.
I have not coached my witness, and I'm not going to tolerate that kind of an accusation.
Well, now counsel is down there.
No, I'm going to finish. My witness is answering his questions.
Answering questions directly.
I am not going to accept your characterization that I have coached my witness.
So Lee gets involved in this. He comes into his own in the mid-1980s, actually, as the chair of the relatively new House Intelligence Committee. And partly because the Iran-Contra affair used intelligence channels in order to accomplish these manipulations. Lee's role in oversight, leading the House Intelligence Committee, and his general stature on foreign affairs issues in the House puts him at the center of oversight when all of this came to light.
Lee had been a vigilant watchdog for 20 years, consistently calling for reform of Congress. In the Iran-Contra hearings, he proved that he also could be a fierce advocate for the Congress. It was day 28 of the testimony. One of the key figures in the clandestine operations, Marine Colonel Oliver North, had testified for hours. Lee responded to the lengthy testimony this way.
Now, the next point with regard to process relates to your attitude toward the Congress. As you would expect, I'm bothered by your comments about the Congress. You show very little appreciation for its role in the foreign policy process. You acknowledge that you were, quote, erroneous, misleading, evasive, and wrong, end of quote, in your testimony to the Congress. I appreciate, sir, that honesty can be hard in the conduct of government. But I am impressed that policy was driven by a series of lies. Lies to the Iranians, lies to the Central Intelligence Agency, lies to the Attorney General, lies to our friends and allies, lies to the Congress, and lies to the American people.
As the hearings progressed and the nation watched, Lee demonstrated his even-handedness.
You said on the first day of your testimony, and I quote, "I didn't want to show Congress a single word on this whole thing," end of quote. I do not see how your attitude can be reconciled with the Constitution of the United States.
And so the Iran-Contra hearings and Hamilton's role bring all of this into the spotlight. Reagan is not brought down by this, but his power and influence was substantially diminished for the remainder of the administration. And the internal White House went through a thorough house cleaning, and all the key people at the National Security Council and so on were purged and replaced.
Lee's leadership of the Iran-Contra Committee was a high point of his, by then, 22 years in Congress. It was symbolic of one of the 3 traits he was honored for as a freshman congressman in 1965, ardent committee work. But by the 1987 Iran-Contra hearings, veteran Lee, unlike freshman Lee, had developed gravitas.
Officials have to stand up and say, I am responsible. I used to get very upset about this. And one of the things I would keep asking is, who's responsible? Who makes the decision? You think I was asking for the crown jewels. They just didn't want to answer it. See, I believe in the separation of powers. I really do. And I believe that each has an important role to play in our system: judicial, legislative, executive. And then you have to exercise that role, and you have to be jealous of it, and you have to assert it. You have to be aggressive. It's not a game we're playing. We got a system. The system has served us very well for over 200 years. It's enabled us to do all kinds of wonderful things as a country. We've got to keep that system and make it work.
In spite of Lee's growing prominence, he never lost his humility and self-effacing humor.
I might begin with a story. One afternoon during the hearings, late in the afternoon, I got a call, not from Judy, but from ABC, and wanted me to appear on the ABC news program that evening. It was a very hot day, and I was very tired. I'd been sitting under the lights all day. I stepped out onto the balcony of the Senate office building. The temperature there was about 120 degrees or so under the lights, and I was sweating profusely. I looked down on the street below me, and there pulled up a half-block long black Cadillac limousine, air-conditioned, and out stepped Peter Jennings. Peter Jennings came up to where I was, and you know, he's handsome as a movie actor. He had a $1,500 suit on. He was very carefully made up. I didn't have any makeup on. They had a fan. And I was the one sweating, but they put the fan on Peter Jennings. And then one of the attendants wanted to check the color of his breast pocket kerchief and kept experimenting with different colors. I didn't have any breast pocket kerchief on. Peter Jennings read his script. I had to think of the answers. And it went through. I struggled through the interview and went back to my office, and I got a call from a friend from Indiana and said, Lee, I just saw you on Peter Jennings' show. Are you sick?
The 1990s. Soviet communism had collapsed. The Berlin Wall was down. The Hubble Space Telescope was up. And so was the minimum wage. It jumped to $3.60 an hour. But it was becoming tougher to afford that house that now cost almost $80,000. It was in the decade of the 90s that an 11-year-old named Taylor Swift made her singing debut with the Star-Spangled Banner at a Philadelphia 76ers game. Kids could watch cartoons anytime on the new VHS tapes, while Microsoft saved Apple from bankruptcy. And Google burst onto the fledgling internet scene to change our lives forever.
There's a general sense that the United States and the cause of freedom and the West in general, both Europe and Asia, the cause of a free and open world have kind of reset, have gotten their footing.
For most Americans, there was a sense of peace and prosperity at home and a new birth of freedom around the world. For Lee, 1990 marked his 25th year as a congressman and his last decade in Congress. He began that decade with a growing commitment to governmental reform and the clout to get something done.
So let's you and I go out here in the next few days, talk to our friends and neighbors, and let them know that the Democrats are coming charging back. We're going to win this election in Fayette County. We're going to win it in the country, and we're going to keep working for the ordinary men and women in this country. Thank you very, very much.
He's always been somebody who has loved the institution of Congress, but also been somebody to have a steely-eyed view of it, to pick out its fallacies and its flaws and its mistakes, its scandals, and correct them.
The common theme I've had is that I think the Congress needs a permanent, ongoing committee interested in reform. The problem of tackling reform sporadically is it just hasn't seemed to work very well. And look, you can't solve all the problems at one shot.
Mr. Speaker, today the House considers House Concurrent Resolution 192, better known as the Hamilton-Gradison Bill on Congressional Reform. The measure proposes the establishment of a joint committee on the organization of Congress to study and to recommend reforms in the operation of this institution.
So I want to see us set up a permanent committee to handle reform suggestions and deal with them one at a time, not try to put together a massive package of reform.
Why can we not have a joint hearing and get this over with between our joint committee between the House and the Senate?
Well, it takes two to tango, and my understanding is that the Senate would not approve that.
Incremental steps rather than giant steps. And I think that's badly needed.
And this institution, which was last reorganized in the early 1970s, simply is not kept up with a changing world. And we now face a variety of new challenges before us. We've not performed very well in recent years. I think most of us would acknowledge that. I want to say that I'm realistic about the possibilities of reform. I know that we can't achieve everything that we would like to, but I think every one of us who support this resolution believe that we can do a better job than we have thus far done.
Lee was respected, he was trusted, he was seen as an expert and an influencer, and he was nonpartisan and bipartisan in the way he approached the facts and the issues. So he had built this reputation over time, solidified that reputation through results and through respect level that he gained through both parties and through presidents.
At this time, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Roma.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 2 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, this is the people's house, and these reforms that we are looking at today should be for all the people of this country. I would like to start my remarks by saluting and commending the dean of my delegation, Lee Hamilton, and also Mr. Gradison from Ohio, for propelling the winds of change. Even before many of the scandals broke in this body, these two gentlemen knew that we needed substantive and real changes in the House of Representatives.
He wasn't afraid of being honest. He had a load of Midwestern common sense in him. He was smart as a whip, and he was, a good umpire, calling the strikes. He wasn't afraid to, call strike three on Democrats, even though he was a Democrat as he went through the process. So in all those different tough assignments that he took on, reform, foreign policy, transparency, scandals, Lee was possibly one of the few people that were respected enough to get the results both in Congress internally and then outside to be able to sell it to the American people.
How much of your time do you spend dealing with that kind of issue? Roads,
my
bridges?
staff and I spend a lot of time on community issues because they're so directly important to people. I suspect a third of our time probably is spent on community project type issues.
I believe this joint committee needs to be established for 3 reasons. I'll just mention them very quickly without elaboration. One we all know is that the American people have a very low opinion of the Congress today. Polls show us, I think, in lower rank in public esteem than any time in the history of this institution. So many Americans have simply lost faith in the ability of the Congress to do its work.
And I think it had become an increasingly lonely effort, principled, and right on the merits. Even in my experience working with him later on in the 9/11 Commission, when we had some recommendations having to do with reforming Congress, Lee always said that reforming Congress will be the hardest part. And those were words spoken from deep, deep experience. He carried the scar tissue of prior efforts.
There's a statue of Will Rogers in the hallways of the Congress, and the legend is, maybe true, that they informed Will Rogers that they wanted to put a statue of him in the hallways of the Congress. And his answer was, put me in a place where I can keep my eye on the boys.
With Congress, every time they make a joke, it's a law. You know, and every time they make a law, it's a joke.
That's what's needed. That's what oversight is all about. You got to keep your eye on them, and it has to be continual, and it has to be adequately funded. And I want to see the Congress looking into every nook and cranny of the executive branch. So you keep your eye on them. It's not that I distrust them, it's just that I know that it's a complicated world that they live in, and they need someone to know that someone is looking over their shoulder. They'll do a better job if they know that.
After 3.5 decades, at the height of his skill and influence, Lee decided it was time to let another person step in to represent the 9th District of Indiana.
Representative Lee Hamilton, a Democrat from Indiana, retired this year after 17 terms.
I think I wanted to change. I had been at it a long time. I had enjoyed it. I had achieved a lot of what I set out to do. And I thought maybe I had a few more years left to work, so I wanted to do something entirely different. And it wasn't any feeling of frustration or anger or anything of the sort. It's time for a change, I guess, was the motivating factor.
Come see me at the Wilson Center.
On September 28, 1998, Lee's colleagues in the U.S. House of Representatives recognized his leadership and contributions with a rare official commemoration.
The 34 years that Mr. Hamilton has been in the House of Representatives, he has built bonds of trust on both sides of the political aisle, and he can always be counted on to put the country ahead of any partisan political politics.
Perhaps the greatest comment on a person's life is the legacy one leaves behind, and Lee's legacy will be his unwavering dedication to the House and our legislative responsibilities in regard to our nation's role in world affairs as well as domestic challenges.
His peers filled the tribute with expressions of thanks and praise that are recorded for posterity in the congressional record.
He became both somebody respected for their great common sense, but also their deep intellectual heft, their ability to say things that might not be particularly popular at times, and to bring people together in consensus to actually get things done.
And at this time, it is certainly my honor to yield such time as he may consume to Mr. Hamilton, our leader in the Indiana delegation.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and of course, first I want to express my appreciation to my friends and Indiana colleagues, Mr. Burton and Mr. Visklosky, for making arrangements for this special order. I shall think very often of this evening and the comments that have been made about me. I've always wanted to walk off the stage before I was kicked off or shoved off, and I think your comments tonight have made me think I have done that.
34 years. That's how long Lee had been in Congress when he walked off that stage. It's hard to imagine what long service that is, but let's try. Here's how Lee characterized that long service.
I had the Library of Congress checked the other day, and I have worked with 1,515 House colleagues. I guess with most of those colleagues, I have had differences from time to time, but I think I can say that I have liked all of them. I've enjoyed their friendship, and I have certainly tried to respect them.
In addition to those 1,500 representatives, Lee also worked closely with 7 presidents for a total of 10 terms.
I, Lyndon Baines Johnson, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President
of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect,
and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
There's another measure of his 34 years, his congressional papers, which he donated to the Indiana University Library. Those papers take up approximately 3,500 archive boxes. That treasure trove of documents includes more than 1 million letters responding to constituents about their concerns, always his top priority.
I think I felt that people appreciated my accessibility. People are kind of overwhelmed. Government is so big, complicated, and they need someone who directs them to the right place.
Thursday, December 31st, 1998, was the day that Lee retired. Retired from Congress, that is. At 68 years of age, he didn't slow down. He stepped up his game.
It would have been around the fall, maybe a little earlier, of 98, because 98 was Lee's final year in Congress and in the House. And Miles came in and said in confidence that Lee Hamilton was thinking of retiring. He was expecting to retire. I don't think it certainly wasn't announced when Miles mentioned it to us. And that he was interested in some close association with the university, and in particular was interested in some kind of center that would have both a advocacy role with respect to the importance of Congress on a completely bipartisan level, but also an educational role as well.
In January of 1999, Lee and Indiana University established the Center on Congress, later renamed the Center on Representative Government.
The Indiana University Center on Representative Government was established in 1999. The idea grew from Congressman Hamilton's recognition of the need to improve the public's understanding of Congress and its role in the lives of ordinary people every day.
I knew I still wanted to get things done in our civic life. In order to do that, you've got to have an institutional presence. You've got to have a mechanism that can help you meet the challenge. I needed help, and I looked to the universities to try to help me find people and put people to work.
Actually, the mission has never changed, or at least the fundamental part of the mission has never changed, which is to educate and prepare the average person to understand how government works.
And I wanted them to understand better what representative government is all about, and most importantly, what responsibilities it puts upon the citizen. It's not a game we're playing. You have to understand politics is the way we get things done. The way we deal with people and problems, that's politics. It's there. You don't like it? Well, you don't have to participate. But if you don't participate, you're not going to have any impact. I want people to understand how marvelous the country is that we have.
Y2K, a new decade, a new century, a new millennium. The year 2000 started with a fizzle as the Y2K hysteria proved to be for nothing. The world didn't come to an end. We didn't get neighborhoods on wheels or flying cars. We did get average home prices jumping to $120,000, with minimum wage doubling all the way to $6.10 an hour. Charlie Brown and the Peanuts gang appeared in their last original comic strip, 50 years after coming onto the scene. At home, we had a presidential election, the outcome of which hung on hanging chads. The results of that Bush-Gore contest were challenged, the first time such a challenge had been lodged since 1876. And in an omen of terrible things to come, the USS Cole was bombed by Al-Qaeda in Yemen.
Explosion claimed the lives of at least 4 sailors on one of our naval vessels, the USS Cole, this morning.
By the time the ball dropped on the new millennium, Lee had distinguished himself as a lawyer, a politician, a legislator, a watchdog, and a reformer. Lee had, in fact, established himself as a big fish in a very big pond. Lee would have a continuing relationship with the Center on Representative Government, but in the meantime, another opportunity arose just a few blocks away from his congressional office. He would dedicate the next 10 years to the job of directing one of the world's leading think tanks.
Wilson always believed that the scholar could learn from the politician, and the politician could learn from the scholar. He was both, of course.
Right.
And that's a tremendously important insight. That's what the Wilson Center is all about, trying to get this mix of the academician and the politician.
Authentic, interested in the world, a quality obviously that Woodrow Wilson himself had. Interested in the people at the center, and all the other qualities he always had, which was to bring people together to solve problems. That's what he did. He did it in Congress, he did it at the center, and to teach the public about international affairs.
By the 2000s in foreign affairs, actually the country was mostly drifting. We had moved into a period of complacency and relative peace. Foreign affairs wasn't really that important. This was the height of what we nowadays call globalization. There were some financial problems with that, to which most Americans didn't pay a lot of attention.
I was sitting on an airplane, getting ready to fly from Washington to Indiana. The attendant came through the airplane when we were still at the gate and said, "You got to get off this airplane." Didn't tell us why. I thought there was a fire or something of that sort. So I grabbed my bag, like everybody else did, and we rushed out the door, still not knowing why.
American 11 Boston. American 11, the American on the frequency, how do you hear me? Is that American 11 trying to call?
We have some planes, just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're turning to the airport.
And there's somebody staffed in business class, and we can't breathe in business class. Somebody's got an ace or something.
The black smoke.
smoke and fire. Hijacked, and there are indications that it may have been a Boeing 767 out of Boston.
I'm in front of the Capitol, and a moment ago, police officers ran up to us and told us, and I quote, "There is a plane that has been hijacked and is headed this way."
I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. I just love you. Please tell my family I love them too. Hi, honey. Tell my children that I love them very much.
Apparently they have flown a couple of planes into the World Trade Center already, and it looks like they're going to take this one down as well. Mostly, I just wanted to say I love you, and I'm going to miss you.
9/11 then has these huge changes. There's a tremendous shock, and as it adjusts to that shock, it's casting around for calm, sober statesmen. And one of the people who surfaced during this period was Lee Hamilton.
We had always assumed that the oceans protected us, that in a sense that we were impenetrable, and we found out that wasn't true. So there was a reaction to what happened and the loss of life we incurred. And the reaction was, how did it happen? What did we do wrong? And what can we do to prevent it happening again?
So there was a strong push to do a proper investigation, building all through 2002 that culminates in the creation of the 9/11 Commission. The 9/11 Commission, first chair and vice chair of the 9/11 Commission were Henry Kissinger, kind of the president's appointee, and the lead Democrat was probably the most respected person on foreign policy at that time coming out of the Senate, which was the former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell.
We were both second choices, and Lee and I used to talk to ourselves about ourselves as the substitutes.
Kissinger realized he'd have to disclose a lot of his financial dealings and very quickly decided that, you know what, actually, this is too hard. I'm not going to do this. So Kissinger resigns. Like almost instantly thereafter, Mitchell resigns. So here's President Bush, like, I just set up this new 9/11 Commission with all this fanfare, and the people I put in charge of it have now resigned. Both, Kissinger and Mitchell. And they look around for statesmen who are not maybe big national celebrities, but who are like really good.
I think Tom Kean deserves much of the credit for this. He was a Republican, I was a Democratic leader. He was the chair, I was vice chair.
I said to Lee, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm going to run this commission, nobody's going to be appointed without your approval. And no decisions, I'm not going to make any decision until you and I have talked on it and agree, and if we don't agree, we're not going to make the decision.
When Tom first came to me, I knew him casually, not well. He said, Lee, every decision that is made by this commission is going to be bipartisan. You and I are going to work together.
I'd been running this bipartisan stuff all my life. That was the way you do it. Lee was surprised, he told me, because he said in Congress, that wasn't the way they do things. He said the chairman is everything. Vice Chairman, Lee said, is nothing. And so when I offered basically to share the power with Lee, I can't believe this. So he waited until I started. I think he was doubtful until I started doing it.
Neither one of us will go by ourselves on television. We will always speak to the press together, never alone.
When I was first appointed, as you know, the Washington Press Corps, I was interested in the newest guy in town, or the newest prominent person in town. And so when the president appointed me, I got a call from Tim Russett. And he said, would you come on the show next Sunday, meet the press? And I said, yes, but we're doing this as a joint bipartisan project, so I'd ask if you would ask Lee Hamilton also. And Tim said, guests don't normally ask guests on these shows. And I said, okay, well, maybe we'll do it sometime later in the year. I hung up. He called me back in 5 minutes. and said, I'd be delighted to have you and Lee on the show.
September 11th is one of the most traumatic days in the history of our country, maybe the most traumatic. We on the 9/11 Commission took our best crack at it. Getting the notification from the President of the United States that you have the authority to shoot into commercial aircraft down is a pretty significant event. Why would that not be in your timeline?
I don't know when that happened.
Thus, the Commission recommends a comprehensive U.S. strategy to counter terrorism, including economic policies that encourage development, open societies, and opportunities for people to improve the lives of their families and enhance prospects for their children.
Lee Hamilton is as decent and as honest and as straightforward as anybody you would ever meet in your life. And the idea that somebody like that has dedicated his life to government is a real compliment to this country of ours and its democracy.
When the 9/11 Commission report was announced, Lee was 73 years old and still president of the Wilson Center. One would think that after this pinnacle moment in his personal civic engagement, Lee would have done what most other people of that age do, retire. But not Lee Hamilton. While he led the Wilson Center, the center's board encouraged him to use his unique qualifications to serve our nation in many capacities. And serve our nation he did in a dizzying string of boards, commissions, and study groups.
If they could add another portrait on Mount Rushmore, I kind of think of Lee that way because he had this very patrician face. He should be up there. I mean, he's really another father of our country. He really is.
The 2010s. Popular protests grew at home and abroad. In the Middle East, protests against authoritarian governments, known as the Arab Spring, spread throughout the region. And U.S. Special Operations troops killed the world's leading terrorist.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
At home, popular protest movements sprung up too. In 2011, the Occupy Wall Street movement spread through social media. And in 2013, 3 Black female activists launch a movement with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. While there were bipartisan legislative successes like the Affordable Care Act, partisanship grew worse. The contention reached a peak in the bitter days of the 2016 presidential election campaigns. Minimum wage had only crept up to $7.25 an hour, but the average home price skyrocketed to $221,000. Kids were watching cartoons and playing Angry Birds on the sensational new iPad. Justin Bieber released his first album of teen puppy love songs, while Drake's innovative rap shaped the way mainstream pop was written and performed. By 2010, Lee had had 2 different rich and fulfilling careers: influential congressman and leader of a world-renowned think tank. At 79, he was beginning a 3rd career. Lee's new role would be that of an educator and public intellectual, settling in as distinguished professor and director of the Center on Representative Government.
Lee indicated that he was going to be retiring as head of the Wilson Center in 2010. Now, at the same time, all that was going on, we had been planning. We'd started the preliminary discussions and thinking about a more school-level organisation that would bring together all of the university's strengths in international affairs and languages.
People have such high respect and regard for him and what he has accomplished and what he did for so many people in the country. And that having his physical presence here did change the tone of the center, because all of a sudden you weren't going in to just ask the executive director a question. You were going to ask Lee Hamilton a question. And he had such a laser focus on where he wanted to see the center go and the activities that he wanted to see the center participate in.
In 2012, as his work with the university was just blossoming, Lee suffered a devastating loss. Nancy, the love of his life, died unexpectedly in a tragic accident. She had been his rock for almost 60 years.
She was very skeptical of politicians as a breed, and didn't have a lot of interest in politics itself. I tell you an interesting story. I was prominent in foreign affairs, and in Washington, in the foreign communities, in the embassies, they invited me to all the dinners. So we had more than most members of Congress invitations to go to the Greek embassy or the British embassy. I went to 1,000 of them. One time I went to one, and Alan Greenspan was then the head of the Federal Reserve. He came up to me after the dinner and says what delighted it was to know Nancy and talk with her. And I thanked him. A few weeks later, we went to another embassy, and she sat next to Secretary of Agriculture, who was a friend of mine. He came up to me afterward and told me what delighted it was to talk to Nancy. That happened the third time with the Secretary of Interior. And finally, I said to Nancy, I said, Nancy, how is it all these men are so complimentary about you? What's going on in these conversations that I don't know about? She said, you know how it is with these Washington men. All you have to do is ask them a few questions about themselves, and they'll talk all night.
Dad was so strong. Her death was devastating. It was sudden. Nobody saw it coming. She wasn't ill. You know, it was a Saturday night, and she had an accident, and she wasn't there. I think it was a body blow, and I think all of us, Dad included, had to really struggle through grief, where you just kind of feel like you're swimming through molasses.
I always think of them as like these wonderfully complementary souls. I mean, she was very friendly, social. She was interested in people's families. She loved the neighborhood. She took care of everything in the domestic sphere. And he was very intellectual, loved policy, focused entirely on work almost. It was a really compatible relationship.
In the face of that tragic personal loss, Lee continued his lifelong work. That same year, 2012, Indiana University established a School of Global and International Affairs. Over the next 2 years, because of his unique expertise, Lee became involved with the school's development. Ultimately, he became its director.
We were really very enthusiastic, and so was Lee, to engage both him and Senator Lugar as deeply and thoroughly as we could in the new school, because we felt that this was an absolutely unrivaled opportunity for students and faculty and others in the school to benefit from the extraordinary career of these two great men.
6 years later, in 2018, IU renamed the school in honor of Lee and his longtime friend across the aisle, Senator Richard Lugar. The Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies leads students in study of international affairs and foreign policy while they get to train on the world stage.
IU now renaming its School of Global and International Studies after two well-known Hoosiers, former U.S. Representative Lee Hamilton and U.S. Senator Richard Lugar. The Board of Trustees will get the final approval on the name change. The IU President Michael McRobbie said that Lugar and Hamilton are, quote, two of the most revered voices in foreign policy in the U.S.
To reinforce, strengthen, and carry forward that tradition, which is to combine knowledge of place, cultures, language, personal experience, with an understanding of how states behave, how international institutions work or don't, and about influences that don't respect borders, whether it's the spread of weapons of mass destruction, or climate change, or global trade.
And then Hamilton and Lugar, especially Hamilton, played a really active and important role, using that then as a bridge, bridging the world of technocrats and substance in Washington with the concerns of students and citizens back home.
2020, Lee turns 89 in the year from hell. A deadly outbreak of COVID-19 swept across the globe. But people found ways of dealing with fear, isolation, and boredom generated by the first pandemic in 100 years. The stock market had its worst day ever. The killing of George Floyd sparked a wave of demonstrations and riots across the world. Joe Biden won the presidential election, another election that was marred by bitter partisanship. That bitterness embodies the kind of civil behavior that's antithetical to the example Lee Hamilton has modeled for our nation. The average home price passed the $300,000 mark. That's more than 40 times the price of a home when Lee was entering his junior year of college in 1950. But while home prices hit record highs, home ownership moved further out of reach for the families whose minimum wage had crept up to only $7.25 an hour. Electric cars came into their own. Women continued their meteoric rise to positions of leadership and influence. And in spite of the pandemic, citizens turned out in record numbers to vote in our national election. 2020 found Lee Hamilton going strong, ensconced as distinguished scholar at the Hamilton Lugar School, and focusing all his time on his lifelong love of representative government and international affairs.
Welcome to the Hamilton Lugar School of International Affairs. This is where we bring together people to learn how to build a consensus behind a solution to solve our problems in a democratic society.
The role of a public intellectual, in a way, has varied in American life. In the rare case where an ex-politician genuinely plays this role, they have earned stature and respect on their knowledge of substance, but they also have earned respect as a person who can both communicate that substance with an understanding of what a lot of people understand and care about.
This is kind of a unique school. Not too many universities have global affairs studies, and Indiana was one of the first, and I think we've become the model for that kind of a school. So my interest at the moment is making this school work and do the job it's meant to do. We have so many marvelous, bright, young people coming out of our schools and universities. It's a lot of talent, and we want to try to make that talent work and put it to good use. So my concern is to have this school meet the needs that the country has at the present time,
You know, even as Lee has progressed in his career and age, the one thing that he still holds extremely, close to his heart is the ability to mentor students. And he loves talking to students today.
I spent a day one day, 18-hour day, in Santiago, with Bill Clinton when he was president. It was a very full day. We must have had 15 or 20 meetings. We got back on the plane at night to fly back to the United States, and I was dead tired. All I wanted to do was eat and sleep. Bill Clinton, who'd been the key figure in all of those meetings, spent the entire night, or almost the entire night, walking up and down the aisles of the airplane, trying to find somebody to talk to him. Energy, sheer animal energy, is required of a leader. Well, I think every person has to focus on the problems that concern them. You can't solve everything. There are too many problems out there. But each person has particular interests. Each person has passion about particular kinds of problems. And they can make the biggest contribution by focusing, I think, on the problems that concern them. And they have to ask themselves, okay, we got a problem here. How do we deal with it? What do we have to do to make things better in our country, in our schools, wherever we are? And so I want them to analyze where they are and where they want the country to be, and see where they can fit in to make a contribution.
And the thing about Lee, I think if you had to say one word, it would be authentic. He really knew who he was.
The only way we can get things done that need to be done is to have civic engagement. Look, you have all these problems, you have all these talented people, and how do they improve things? And they do it only by getting engaged. So that civic engagement is enormously important for the future of the country. If we don't have it, the whole thing kind of falls apart. I think, I'm coming to the end of my working days. Maybe I'm already there. Some people said I should quit long ago. I feel like this is the one spot I can still make a contribution.
We need more Lee Hamiltons today. We need more people of integrity and honesty and trust.
I think you have to accept the fact that you're always going to find a lot of disagreement, and should. And look upon it as a challenge rather than something that's going to bog you down. There's so many problems and so many issues out there that sometimes they seem overwhelming, that, oh my gosh, we'll never be able to get it. I can remember driving across the 14th Street Bridge in Washington a number of times late at night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, saying to myself, oh gosh, we're never going to solve that problem. We're just too divided. And then I'd come back the next morning and I'd see those people that's sitting there working on the problem. And I'd say to myself, we're going to make it.
Lee Hamilton is one of the extraordinary people that I've ever met in my life. And I admired him before I ever knew him.
I think democracy is always under threat. I think there's always a challenge to whether or not we can make this country work. Whether this nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. That was the question that Lincoln asked, and it's still a question. It's the operating question. It isn't written in the stars somewhere. It depends on us.
At its best, Lee Hamilton once said, representative democracy gives us a system where all of us have a voice in the process and a stake in the product. In his 34 years in Congress, Lee Hamilton was a faithful servant to that ideal.
The Honorable Lee H. Hamilton. His leadership in Congress reflected his profound commitment to preserving the safety and integrity of our nation, and his role in promoting civic engagement has made an impact that will endure for generations to come. Lee H. Hamilton has helped steer the course of American history in a spirit of bipartisanship, and he continues to strengthen the homeland and promote diplomacy.